Hello, everyone. It's Rabbi Akiva Males, and I hope you're well. I know Friday Purim is going to be a very busy day, so I wanted to send out a Dvar Torah today instead of sending it out Erev Shabbos like I normally do. And in this Dvar Torah, I want to share with you something on Megillas Esther. There's a famous idea, I can't say I understand it, but it's brought down in many sources, that the Arizal would say over that there's a connection between Yaakov and Esav and Mordechai and Haman. That somehow or another, however this is to be understood, that Yaakov was a Gilgal, it was the Neshama, there was part of the Neshama. However we understand that concept of Yaakov returns to earth centuries, generations later in the time of the Purim story, and Mordechai has in him some of the Neshama of Yaakov Avinu. And similarly, Yaakov struggled with his brother Esav. So Esav, years and years later, generations somehow later, his neshama comes back to earth and it is inside of Haman. So this confrontation, the struggle between Yaakov and Esav that occurs in Sefer Bereshis plays itself out to some degree or another much later in history between Mordechai and Haman during the whole episode of Purim that we're going to read about in Megillas Esther. That's a famous concept that the Arizal writes, and many people quote this. Well, again, while I can't say I fully understand that concept, if you do look, there are an incredible number of coincidences, you might say, between Sefer Bereshis, specifically Parshas Toldos, and a little bit later in Vayishlach, you'll find about the experiences between Yaakov and Esav that seem to have an extreme parallel in the Megillah. Let's just look at a couple of them. Number one, in Bereshis, and Toldos, when Yaakov Avinu takes the brachos, takes those blessings from Esav, we're told that Esav lets out a great scream. Vayitzak tza'aka gdola mara. He lets out a great and bitter scream because he missed out on those brachos. And the Medrash picks up on this, that in Megillas Esther, when Mordechai finds out about that decree that Haman has issued to eradicate the Jewish people, it says, Vayitzak tza'aka gdola mara. He let out a great and bitter cry. And the Medrash points out, in a certain sense, Yaakov caused Esav that amount of pain to have that bitter cry back in Parshas Toldos. How does Mida Keneged Mida work its way out? That generations later, Yaakov, Neshama, you might say, his descendant, his great-great-grandson, Mordechai, is going to let out this bitter cry when Haman plots his evil plan. One connection. Another connection. We're told in Parshas Vayishlach that when Yaakov finally has this encounter with Esav, after being separated from so long, he bows down to him multiple times. And there's some saying in Chazal, did he go too far? You'll see some of the Mefarshim are bothered by, did Yaakov go too far in how he was machnia, how he lowered himself to Esav? But look what happens so many centuries, generations later. Mordechai, if there is this connection between Mordechai and Yaakov, what did Mordechai refuse to do to Haman? He refused to bow down. Perhaps you might say this idea, he was misaken, somehow or another, he was correcting years and generations later, something that Yaakov may have gone a little bit too far. Another fascinating connection. I want to share with you a few more. The Baal HaTurim has a very cryptic perush on the Chumash. The Baal HaTurim points out that the word Vayivez shows up twice in all of Tanakh. It shows up in Parshas Toldos when it tells us Vayivez Esav es HaBechora, that Esav despised or he mocked, he belittled the Bechorah, the birthright, and that's why he was willing to sell it for a pot of soup. What's the second time that Vayivez shows up in all of Tanakh? That it talks about Haman. Vayivez be'einav l'shlach yad b'Mordechai levado. That Haman scoffed at the idea of just taking out his wrath on Mordechai alone. He wanted to take it out on this entire people, on all of Klal Yisrael. Fascinating connection. The two times Vayivez shows up in Tanakh is again that connection between Haman and Esav, his great-great-great-grandfather. The Baal HaTurim has another point. I shared this with the students of mine in Chumash class this year. We were studying Parshas Vayishlach. In Vayishlach, when Yaakov has his tefillah, he davens to Hashem before confronting Esav. He says, Hatzileni no miyad achi, miyad Esav. Save me from the hands of my brother, from Esav. And the Baal HaTurim points out, look at those three words, Hatzileni no miyad. The first letter, Hatzileni is a hey, Nun is an na, and miyad is a mem. You rearrange those words, those letters rather, you get Haman. So the Baal HaTurim points out that what Yaakov was davening for in that confrontation with Esav was he had an idea that there's going to come another point in history where we're going to meet up again, where Haman where Yaakov and Esav are going to meet up again. Their descendants are going to meet up. It's going to be Mordechai and Haman. And what does Haman want to do in those days? He also wants to destroy all of Klal Yisrael, just like his great-great-grandfather Esav wanted to do at that point. Hatzileni no miyad achi miyad Esav. So Yaakov was mispal, he was davening, not just for what the challenge he was facing just then, but what his descendants would face so many centuries later. Another fascinating connection. And let me share with you another, also in Parshas Vayishlach. The Baal HaTurim points out that there's 2 times in all of Tanakh the word revach shows up. That it says when Yaakov was sending these gifts of animals to his brother Esav, he says, V'revach tasimu ben eder le'eder. He instructed his messengers, make sure that there's a good distance between each flock, between every group of animals that you're sending Esav. And the Baal HaTurim says revach shows up another time. Where? Again, in Megillas Esther. Revach v'hatzala yamod la'Yehudim makom acher. That Mordechai tells Esther when she was a little bit reluctant to go in and see Achashverosh before she was summoned, he tells Esther, is that relief, security is going to come for the Jewish people. Deliverance is going to come from somewhere else. This is your opportunity. Seize the moment. Absolutely amazing that there are so many links between the experiences of Yaakov and Esav to the experiences that we're going to read about on Purim between Mordechai and Haman. I just want to conclude with something that I also saw said over from Rav David Cohen in Brooklyn. He says, perhaps this sheds new light on what we sing when the Megillah ends. We sing Shoshanas Yaakov, Tzala v'Samecha. Of everything we're singing, where's Yaakov coming into this? Now it makes a bit more sense. Yaakov Avinu, his fingerprints are all over Megillas Esther. We may never have noticed it before, but it could have been hidden in plain sight. But Yaakov's fingerprints is all over it. Maisa Avo Siman Labanim. There's this idea of what our ancestors went through was setting the template for what their descendants would experience. And there are so many links between the confrontation and the trials and tribulations between Yaakov and Esav to Mordechai and Haman and Megillas Esther. Here are a couple of them that we just shared now. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should open our eyes, that we should find more. And just Ma'aseh Siman Labanim, just like Yaakov was ultimately, he was victorious in his struggle with Esav. And just like Mordechai and Esther were victorious in their struggle with Haman, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should see to it that their descendants, all of us, all of Klal Yisrael, we should emerge from all the confrontations with all of those enemies that are out there. There are every generation, there are those who want to stand up to eradicate Klal Yisrael. And just like our ancestors before us were victorious in their confrontation with Esav, their confrontation with Haman, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should send the Yeshua, he should send the ultimate salvation to see to it that we should be successful and we should be victorious against all of our enemies who stand up to oppose us. With that, I want to wish everyone a Purim Sameach, a Freilichen Purim, a happy Purim, a safe Purim, and all the very best. Have a good night.